Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for stepping out of the cloud, because I'm pretty sure we've all been there today several times already, and coming here in person as physical human beings into a room, listening to other physical human beings and celebrating also the fact that we are still somewhat physical and doing so at a campus that really embraces that. We are still a presence campus, so that means we are trying to bring people together, looking at the benefits of the cloud, obviously, but also still kind of like celebrating the fact that human beings learn a lot from seeing each other face to face. My name is Bernadette Kamm-Leitner. I'm Vice Rector for Research and Third Mission here at WU Vienna, and it's my utmost pleasure to welcome you all to this event series on behalf of the entire Rectorate. Event series because this is part of a bigger series, but it's also a collaborative event. I'll say more about that later on. We have this WU Matters, WU Talk series. And it's part of our commitment to what is called the third mission. Universities have three missions. The first one is research. Second one, teaching. And the third one has no other title than third mission. So what is it? Essentially, it's our attempt to transmit the knowledge we generate to society, but also, and that's very important, to co-generate it with society, so that whatever we do here is not just happening inside of the ivory tower. And this is what this event is about today as well. It's supposed to be of societal merit, and I think the topic couldn't be of more societal relevance. It's about a topic that is part and parcel of our everyday lives, and yet we rarely stop to question it. It's the question of how much we are being essentially influenced by some big companies out there, the tech companies, that are affecting the way we navigate the world today. And the fact that they do so without, quite often, comparably little scrutiny. And we have an absolute expert panel today that will talk us through and give us complementary perspectives on why this can happen, but also what the implications could be, from a business angle and also from a societal angle. I'm particularly happy to welcome today's panel and today's speakers. Front and foremost, Vili, so I could pronounce it just early, Lehdonvirta, okay, who's joining us from the Oxford Internet Institute. Isabell Claus, the Managing Director of Thinkers AI and an alumni of WU Vienna. And my esteemed colleagues, Thomas Reutterer and Vicky Robertson. Thank you all for being here today. Can we just have a... I mentioned earlier it's a collaborative event, and it's certainly an event that would not have happened if it were just down to us, because there has been somebody triggering this event. And it's my utmost pleasure to welcome and thank Dr. Michael Stampfer, Managing Director of the WWTF, the Vienna Science and Technology Fund, and his amazing team, for making this happen, for bringing Vili to Vienna, and for triggering this event and supporting it throughout. Thank you very much for being here today, and also for moderating the event, which is always the trickiest part of it, I feel. So thank you. You want to take over now?
I take over now. If
okay.
You don't...
Just one more thanks.
Sorry.
You might have noticed outside that there is something happening in terms of an event. So tomorrow there's a good reason to come back to the campus, because we are going to have the summer festival with a lot of stage acts, a food court, etc. We're expecting around 10,000 people, and there's going to be a very peak party. And the reason I'm mentioning this now is because it gives me the entrance to the last party of people that I'd like to thank, and that's the event team, which, despite having this very massive event happening tomorrow, made sure that everything runs smoothly today. So thanks to the event team as well, and welcome to Vienna, and thank you, Dr. Stampfer, for guiding us through tonight.
Who says sorry for being too quick on the stage. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Rector Kamleitner. Tomorrow, I'm living on the other side of the Donaukanal in the 3rd district, and the clouds of the smoke of the roast sausages, grilled sausages, will even be felt there, and perhaps I just come over, yeah? This is a great opportunity. I start with a personal thing. It was a trouvaille. I got in an online magazine. I saw the announcement of a book, Cloud Empires, and the 10-liner describing it ticked all the alarm boxes, the positive alarm boxes. I have to read that, yeah. And I can only tell everybody here, dear audience, this is a fantastic read. For me, it's comparable to Shoshana Zuboff and other real seminal books about the digital revolution, which forces all of us, wherever we are, whatever we do, to open our eyes to what is changing fast and decisively. And sometimes we are seldom in the driver's seat. Sometimes we are on the bus. Sometimes we're in the cloud, in the dusty cloud when the bus passes by. So it's really a great reading, and you will see that in a minute when Vili will start. Our approach, why people like my esteemed colleague Michael or my esteemed board members Stefan and Clemens, why we are aware of these topics has to do with an initiative that has been started by a number of people, including Hannes Wertner and others here in this room, which we call digital humanism, where Vili is also very active, help from outside in selecting proposals for us, where we say we have to bring computer sciences and humanities and social sciences and societal actors closer together. So to help, and I say that I will get bashed in social science research institutions, so that the computer scientists are less naive and the social scientists are less ignorant in this changing world. Yeah? And to be not only insulting but also helpful, we provide money with the Vienna Science and Technology Fund, which is obviously a funding institution. We have to defend the fundamentals, and that would have been, as regards digital issues, that would have been a no-brainer that we, 10, 15 years, we would have, most of us thought, yeah, digitalization is good for democracy, good for free speech, good for social market economy, good for this and good for that. Even then, with a closer look, a lot of interesting developments might have been discernible, but in the last years we have seen a lot of unstartling changes, where a lot of gain in freedom, opportunity, global interconnectedness, name what you want, interesting playgrounds, has been also in parts, and here's another part of the cloud metaphor, has been overshadowed by very unsettling developments. And when we follow that back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we see also that there's an anti-state, anti-organized society, anti-middleman, anti-civilization movement where early computer pioneers were already very active in pursuing that. And Vili, I will not now will not steal your story, but where we see that the number of obviously or necessary developments has led us into the acceptance of the existence of huge actors who now behave like states. So, and we have something to defend. This is our civilization. Our civilization has a lot of, we are now in an age of complaining about our civilization and about ourselves, but we should not forget it has a lot of great things it has brought about, and institutions with a very positive self-reinforcing, with self-reinforcing effects of positive developments like markets, like democracy, like free speech, like other institutions. And we need people who open our eyes. We are training, and here in Vienna, many young people are already in the digital humanism projects and at the universities and so on. But we also need experts, a network of experts of all over the world, and here you are today giving us the talk. As Bernadette Kamleitner has already introduced you, you're a professor of economic sociology and digital social research at the Oxford Internet Institute. And recently also became a professor, I think 50-50, you told me, at Aalto University, a very smart interdisciplinary university in southern Finland. There also. You're a serial ERC hitter. That's for everybody in the scientific community, that's a kind of aha marker. Large, very competitive funded projects by the European Research Council. One on the implications of platforms on labor markets, global development and collective actions, which also is covered, I think, in 1 or 2 chapters in your book. And recently on the geopolitics of cloud computing, and I think we should invite you in a year again to give us some introduction on that. Ongoing research projects are too many to list up here. Stations in your life have been Turku, Helsinki, London, Tokyo, Oxford, of course, and many other places. My place is now here, yours is here. Please give us your talk, dear Vili.
Thank you very much, Vice Rector and Dr. Stampfer for this, for the invitation, and for your generous introduction as well. So, as mentioned, I work at something called the Oxford Internet Institute, and I teach graduate students, and a lot of them go on to work in big tech companies. One of them emailed me a while ago, and he wrote, to paraphrase a little bit, he wrote, I wrote to ask for suggestions. I'm now doing project management for major platform. We have hundreds of millions of members doing different sorts of economic activities. I'd be really grateful if you could point out some books and articles on national governance frameworks, how governments manage their populations, and so on, so that we can improve our product design. Because we think there's a similarity between how our company manages its members and how governments manage citizens. So, he thinks that these giant tech companies are now somehow similar to governments. Why? Well, it's true that, for instance, if you take Amazon, the value of all the goods traded on Amazon's marketplaces globally in a year is higher than most countries' GDP. And the amount of money that Amazon raises as taxes by levying fees on the merchants who use its platforms is more than most governments are able to raise in tax revenues. Amazon sets these detailed rules and sort of regulations that you have to follow, especially as a seller on the platform. And if things go wrong and there's a dispute between a buyer and a seller, it's Amazon who's called in to investigate, to adjudicate, to punish scammers and offer restitution to victims. And this is, of course, not just in e-commerce. There are almost every area of life, from job hunting to dating, from political discussion to entertainment. There's now some sort of a giant platform that decides what's permitted, what's prohibited, who can interact with whom, what sorts of agreements are possible, and what kinds of rights and guarantees you have in practice if things go wrong. So it's almost as if though they've become some sort of a virtual government, isn't it? And you know, people have started to notice this. Is Microsoft a digital nation, and does it have a Secretary of State? Asked The Economist. Apple is basically a small country now, claimed The Atlantic. Who needs government when you've got Amazon to keep things running, joked a columnist at The Guardian. And Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg himself once mused that Facebook had become more like a government than a traditional company. But not all is well in these virtual states. Their leaders enjoy immense power without commensurate levels of accountability. And they've been discovered abusing that power. As soon as Amazon became so big that no book publisher could afford to remain outside the platform, founder Jeff Bezos instructed his managers to start preying on the publishers like, quote, a cheetah pursues a sickly gazelle, unquote. If a publisher tried to resist Amazon's demands, then the platform would simply stop recommending their books and direct customers to competitors' offerings instead. Publishers had no choice but to let Amazon tax away all their profits. Or consider Apple. For many years, the most popular music app in Apple App Store was Spotify, made in Sweden. Any Spotify users here? I'm from Finland, so we're supposed to be a bit envious of Swedes having this wonderful Spotify, but I'm a happy user. So whenever you searched for music on Apple App Store, the first hit would always be Spotify, because it was the #1 music app. Until one day, Apple launched its own music app, Apple Music. And suddenly, the next day, if you went on Apple App Store and you searched for music, the #1 search result was no longer Spotify. And Spotify wasn't #2 either. It wasn't even #3. It was number 23, behind all kinds of apps that didn't even have anything to do with music anymore. So Apple had essentially used its government-like power over the marketplace to bend the rules and disappear a competitor. And in the book, I basically ask, how did we end up here? Because the internet was supposed to free us from gatekeepers. Those of you who are old enough to remember, in the 90s, the internet was supposed to empower individuals and entrepreneurs and democratize markets and birth a new social fabric based on self-organized networks and communities instead of middlemen and gatekeepers and top-down authority. For decades, visionaries like Marshall McLuhan claimed that we'd all be living in a global village. But now that everyone's finally online, the scenery looks very different. It doesn't look like a village. It looks a lot like being managed by a bureaucratic government all over again. Except that this time we don't even get to vote for the leaders. A bunch of self-appointed autocrats run the administration. So why? Why did things turn out this way? Now, many scholars argue that the tech giants stole into power by means of anti-competitive business practices and other underhanded methods. For instance, Amazon sold some goods at a loss until its competitors were driven out of business and thus captured the market. And if we stopped such practices with better competition laws, then the internet could live up to its original self-organizing, egalitarian, democratic promise, they hope. Now, I agree that we should improve competition laws and stop anti-competitive practices, but I don't think that would ultimately change the internet structure very much, because I think that there's another more fundamental reason why this global village vision of the internet failed and the private government model prevailed. And to understand this reason, we have to go back in times to the earlier days of the internet. Who was online in the 90s? Yeah, like some of you, yeah. I'm sure you were. I first bought something online in 1993, if I remember correctly. Can you guess what it was? The very first online purchase in the history of online purchases of e-commerce is supposedly, according to internet legend, it's drugs. Back in 1971 or 1972, some MIT students ordered weed from Stanford students online. So that's considered to be the first e-commerce transaction. But no, I just bought some games directly from the developer in US, in Portland, Oregon, I think. And back in those days, there was no Amazon or eBay or Apple App Store to police the transactions. It was all based on personal trust and word of mouth. You know, there was a thing called the netiquette. I don't know if anyone remembers anymore, but to be allowed to go online in my university, you first had to pass a test in netiquette, a voluntary code of conduct which specifies that you're supposed to treat others with respect and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and don't use naughty language, or, God forbid, don't scam or defraud other people. So I sent a check for $50 to some guy in Portland I met online, and he could have just kept the money and there wouldn't have been anything I could have done about it. But he knew that if he didn't deliver the games as promised, then his reputation in the community would be ruined. He would be ostracized. So back in those days, the internet was, in this sense, a little bit like a village, a rural community. Order was based on informal social norms rather than formal rules imposed by a government authority. And the biggest internet service providers at this time and for a long time were universities, right? And every September or October there was an influx of new users to the internet when the first-year students got their computing accounts. And they were unfamiliar with the netiquette, with the unwritten rules of the old electronic communities. So every September the order tended to kind of break down a little bit. There was a little bit of anarchy until these newcomers to the internet, they learned how to behave themselves. They learned the informal norms of conduct, or else left. And this cycle went on for many years. But then came the infamous September of 1993. This time the old-timers noticed that something was different. There were more of the newcomers arriving than usual. And September changed to October, October changed to November. Still they were coming. Months passed And still, more and more people were coming. So what had happened was that the internet boom of the mid-90s had started. AOL, the largest commercial online service provider at the time, which had 1 million subscribers at the time, had opened up access to new internet services for its entire user base. And as a result, what once were a bit like rural communities and villages suddenly grew into these boom towns. Population multiplied. And then eventually into this one giant online suburb. And in online, sort of the old internet folklore, this new era came to be known as the September that never ended, or the eternal September. And in this era of the eternal September, the old social order based on informal norms and etiquette broke down, because most people on the internet no longer knew each other. Like strangers passing by in the streets of a massive city, they didn't feel any particular bond or obligation towards each other. The old communal marketplaces got overwhelmed with scammers and spam, and there wasn't really anything that could be done about it. There's one market goer I cite in the book complained in 1995 that someone or some authoritative body should do something about all the scams that are going on here. But in a communal economy that's meant to be structured by informal norms, and there wasn't any authority empowered to do anything about it. And so it was that by 1995, the internet had become notorious for its fraud and deception. 92% of Americans, according to a survey, were not comfortable using a credit card online. Compared to today, everyone's using credit cards online. Buying something from the internet was considered risky at best, stupid at worst. People advised their children, definitely don't buy anything online, it's a scam, for sure. Today we buy about 50% of retail transactions online. So what changed? In July of 1995, Jeff and Mackenzie Bezos founded Amazon. A few months later, Pierre Omidyar, a French-Iranian immigrant in the Silicon Valley, started eBay. A decade later, Apple launched Apple App Store. And these and other new centralized platforms, they enforced rules. They policed conduct. They successfully slashed fraud and spam by surveilling their users and kicking out those who misbehaved. And consumers found safety within their walled gardens. Small businesses celebrated the new markets and opportunities that they enabled. The digital economy surged, and these platform companies grew into the multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar businesses that we know them as today. So now we've arrived at the fundamental reason why the global village model failed and the private government model prevailed. It's because informal social order doesn't scale. Throughout history, large-scale social order, large-scale economies and markets have always depended on the emergence of centralized authorities. Centralized digital platforms became huge successes not despite policing and monitoring their users, but because of it. Like modern states, these cloud empires registered people into their databases, issued regulations, monitored compliance, and sanctioned offenders. So in a way, Silicon Valley companies simply rediscovered what governments had been doing all along and did the same on the internet. In this sense, the internet simply recapitulated the past 3,000 years of economic history in 30 years. Now, of course, this now leaves us in the uncomfortable position of having these private technology companies functioning as the de facto governments of the transnational internet economy, ruling alongside our older territorial forms of government. And like many governments throughout history, these new cloud empires are not very democratic. They're not very accountable to the people they govern. And hence, they sometimes blatantly abuse their power, such as the Apple versus Spotify case, or Amazon's many abuses. Is there anything that can be done? Well, a lot could be said about this, but on the one hand, territorial governments are trying to subjugate these new cloud empires, to basically force clouds to respect local laws when they pass over a territory. The EU obviously has in recent years created many new regulations that go some way towards achieving this. But then at the same time, and more recently, territorial governments have started to try to enlist cloud empires as allies in their conflicts with other territorial governments. For instance, Vladimir Putin wages a war of imperialistic conquest against Ukraine. In a speech in which he justified this invasion, he said that he laments the loss of the former Russian Empire's territory, which also includes my home country, Finland. And even though the war is fought in the towns and fields of Ukraine, it's also fought on the internet, on social media sites, over public opinion, in information systems, over sensitive data, via cyber attacks on digital infrastructures in hospitals to degrade government capacity. And much of the outcome of this internet warfare depends on whom the internet lords, the princes of the cloud empires, decide to side with. And to their credit, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and several other Silicon Valley tech giants have helped the Ukrainian government to protect its information systems against both cyber attacks and bombs. But we know that some tech princes, like Twitter's Elon Musk, have at times appeared, shall we say, more susceptible to Putin's twisted worldview. And governments face a sort of dilemma as a result. Should you try to regulate the tech princes and risk angering them? Or should you go easy on them, not regulate them so hard, and that way attempt to curry their favor in these international conflicts? Well, either way, at the root of the problem really is the concentration of power. The fact that cloud empires are autocracies run by the small elites. Is this ever going to change? Well, I'll finish with a sort of historical vignette. Consider that because you might think that, well, these, I call them cloud empires, but they're still private companies, so they're not going to be democratic, are they, right? How would that happen? They're different. They're in a different category from states, right? But actually, almost every state in the world was, at some point in its history, essentially the private property of some man, woman, or group of people. For instance, I was giving a talk in the US recently, and the state of Virginia in North America is a particularly classic example. It was literally a venture-funded startup company in the early 17th century, okay? Its business model was similar to Amazon. Attract artisans from Europe to set up shop and do business there, tax those artisans, and then pay dividends back to shareholders in England. It was founded by a serial entrepreneur and seed-funded by 4 high net worth individuals, lords in England, and then it issued, it did an IPO. It issued shares to institutional and individual investors in the UK. And the whole operation was run by a board of directors based in London. But suffice to say, these governance arrangements didn't last, because actually, after a while, the artisans who ran the economy and created all the value, they began to demand a say in how the place was being run. And fast forward 200 years, and now the Democratic Commonwealth, actually more like 300 years, and now the Democratic Commonwealth of Virginia is one of the constituent parts of the United States of America. So obviously this transformation from company to Commonwealth, in this case, it took hundreds of years to unfold. But so far the internet has zoomed through history at a manifold speed. And already we can see rebellions brewing in the digital colonies. But that's a story for another time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Isabell, Claus, Victoria Robertson and Thomas Reutterer also on the stage. I didn't promise too much before. Dr. Isabell Claus is the CEO of Thinkers AI, a provider of trustworthy data needed for AI-based personal assistance and business intelligence systems in companies, both to see what the company knows, but also how a fast-moving and changing business environment should be analyzed and forecasted for companies to survive, because in part of what you said, but also for other reasons, business life has become more unstable and risky for many sectors now, and that's where you come in. It's not the first company you have been creating. Obviously, WU was very good education part. Did a good job in education here. And you have a successful record with companies in cybersecurity and other fields. And you have also an engagement in digital startups, in growth in Austria, and do a lot are involved in a lot of activities here. And you've been educated in top institutions on 3 continents. I will not go into detail. Victoria Robertson, she is professor for commercial law, competition law, and digitalization. So exactly one of the main topics tonight here. You are focusing on the challenges of competition and markets in the digital sphere, and also this has some elements also of pioneering work, because not everything what's in the old real economy regarding markets, failure, monopolies can be legally and also in economic terms transferred directly into the digital world. You met once in Oxford before, or more than once, so Victoria had also her stay in Oxford, but it's also and in many other places, but she has been professor in Graz, I think, until 3 or 4 years ago. Thomas Reutterer, also professor here at the WU, like Victoria, is professor of marketing, specialized on consumer behavior in data-driven service sectors. So some of the main actors of data-driven service sectors we have been presented with already, but your field is also broader. You have a lot of research interests, but also a background in consulting for some time before your academic career. And in the last years, you are concentrating on also in your research on AI-driven tools and methods, also including large language models, which has put another in the everywhere another layer of speed and complexity to the digital world. Your academic journey includes places like St. Gallen, Frankfurt, Munich, Wollongong, where I've been already once at the University of Wollongong, and Sydney, and I'm really happy to have you all here. I start with the question to Isabell Claus. I'm really, I hate determinism, but here it's difficult to escape this view of deterministic description of deterministic developments. All across the chapters of cloud empires, there's this kind of seemingly unstoppable and seemingly without, if you want to succeed, there's no alternative. First, it's all, as Vili told us, all nice and happy, and then you end up with this individuals or small groups of people who have state-like regulatory powers. This self-imposing imposition plus hyperscale makes it difficult for many of us how to deal with these companies. Is this something which is strongly affecting your work as an entrepreneur, or how does it affect your customers when you work with them? Have you already worked with a company ruined by Amazon or whoever? So how do you position yourself both idea-wise but also practice-wise in this world?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me, also being here. I'm always happy to be back at university, where I stayed many years and learned actually a lot, and a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, actually. And thanks for the question. I think on the side of entrepreneurs, you think differently. You don't think from €1 revenue to 100 billion, but you think, okay, can I make 1 million? Can I make 10 million? Can I make 100 million? Then it's fine for me. So this is the entrepreneurial side that I don't see the problem immediately. And actually there are lots of parts of the cake that are so big that is so much motivation in the whole market that is served by big techs for entrepreneurs. There's lots of opportunities, and I think that's enough for an entrepreneur. So I don't think that the main problems are at the entrepreneurial side or at the motivation to fund a company. What I do see, we are analyzing a lot of web data for companies actually, and what we do see a lot is that now is the time with the LLM, with the large language models, and changing a lot of things, and especially in information management and knowledge management, that companies suddenly wake up and say, wait a minute, now we know that we don't know much. So the whole market, the whole volatility in the world, lots of changes, have the effect that if you look at internet, at information, you know, it's the biggest source of information worldwide, and it's really hard to access relevant knowledge. It's in academia, and it's also in business. It's really not something where you are pushed to relevant information, but you really have to search for it, and you need to know what you're searching for. And that's a big problem when it comes to big companies, that these are big ships, and you cannot immediately turn a big ship so fast. And if you know something too late, which is important for your business, either on the risk side or on the sales side, it's very difficult for a company to change the course. And a market player who has a lot of data and who knows it before has much advantage. And actually, we don't have a search engine, a big one in Europe. We do have two data, let's say, web data collections in the US, which is Google and Bing from Microsoft. And we do have one in Russia, Yandex, and we do have one in China, Baidu. So this is the world of the big data collectors. And there's Europe totally missing in this field. And I think this is the first very, very big political and economic mistake, because if you don't have access to the data, and on top, these companies, these 4 companies, learned for the last 20 years how to cope with this data. So this is really a strategic asset that we do not possess, and therewith we do have a lot of problems on the side of companies not not that much on the entrepreneur, but on the bigger company side.
Thank you. That leads me immediately to you, Mr. Reutterer. As an expert working with digital companies, also including platform, what are your experience? This is obviously, as Isabell Claus said, also not a zero-sum game, but there's a lot to gain and perhaps even an endless frontier. How are all these instruments like data collection, but now also the autonomous, semi-autonomous systems, then the large language models, how do they influence digital markets? So what can you tell us from your research, what might either complement or contradict the findings on the political side of political sciences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me here. I was very inspired by, I had a look into the book by Vili, and today's afternoon we had faculty meetings. Faculty meetings, I give you always the opportunity to think about different stuff. So it's treated in a faculty meeting. I'm kidding. And I thought a lot about it, and I think we already talked about, when we were gathering together, I could talk for a day about that, but I would like to point to I would like to make 3 points maybe. The first one is I see there that we are since LLMs were already mentioned a couple of times, I see a certain risk that we run from one dependency in another one. So the first dependency is what is the Googles and the big players, the big platforms, they are under control, they control the algorithms, they provide you quality scores, sometimes they change it. I disagree a little bit with Vili because they don't change it too much, because if they change it too much, then they don't make revenue anymore, because the whole digital market, the digital advertising market works by a certain type of stability and so on, but still, you know, and we have many firms, but also research going on. Actually, we had a research project where we did search engine optimization, search engine advertising, digital advertising, where we tried to improve Google ranking positions, and essentially what you do, you try to reverse engineer what these guys are doing, right? This is the one thing, right? The other thing is, and that creates a dependency. And it creates a dependency. My academic age is not so young anymore. In the old days, we had a couple of, I did a lot of stuff with loyalty programs and so on, you know. If you have a research partner, and the kind of research I'm doing, I'm always depending on firms. So if one firm doesn't want to cooperate with you anymore, you go to the next one. In these days, it's not easy, right? So what dependence are we moving to? There is the risk that, so the LLMs, so my projection is we move from search engine optimization, what we call large language model optimizations. Because as a marketing professor, it's very important that as a brand, that you are in the content that is used to train the large language models. Yeah? So if you are not finding there, and if you're not finding a way that you would like to have you represented in the large language models, which is probably increasingly used for search queries, sooner or later they will substitute search engines, right? There is a hope that it might be becoming more competitive. I don't think so. Google has already their own large language model and so on. So the one thing is this dependency issue, right? And the other thing is, and that's more, if I put my research hat on my head, is that that most of the technical innovations are not happening on the universities anymore. You know? So, for example, when we had in the 90s, the famous Sepp Hochreiter and Jürgen Schmidhuber, they came up with the LSTM. I don't think that this would be possible today anymore. So that the technical revolutions that are happening now, so for example, all you need is attention, or attention is all you need, the paper that is basically the technological foundation for all these transformer models that we have now, ChatGPT and all this kind of stuff, was done by Google. So there is more and more research done by those platform firms and not by universities anymore. This is also a big issue that I see. Yeah? And to be honest, I don't know really a way out, but maybe we come to that point anyways.
Yeah, but I have now a consolation for all the political scientists and sociologists who complain that they don't get social media data, that I can tell them even the marketing professors don't get them anymore. So
you need access to the API, and if the API is closed, exactly. You're done with your research, right? Yeah.
So that is, Victoria, that's not a signal of a functioning market, what we just heard. Can you just describe us a few specificities without going into detail, because this would be a lecture of its own, of digital monopolies and digital market squeeze? We see many duopolies, many monopolies, forms of power concentration, which have to do with some specific properties of digital service companies. Could you tell us one or two examples of difficult issues you are confronted with as a researchers, and what can be done to control such distortions? I know this is an impossible, and even more impossibly broad questions than the other two got, but that's how it is. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. So let me start by asking, why are digital markets not functioning the way we think they should be functioning? And let me also clarify that I'm not an economist. This is a lawyer's perspective on this issue. So when I look at digital markets, we see lots of network effects. So direct network effects, meaning that we want to be on the messaging service where our friends and family are, and indirect network effects, meaning that advertisers want to be where we are. And this leads to concentration, naturally. What we've also seen in digital markets is a lot of product differentiation. Functionalities are constantly evolving. The WhatsApp that we use today no longer looks like the WhatsApp that we used 5 years ago. We have group video calls and chats and editing functions and everything. So this means that the market boundaries have been blurring, and there has been an integration of markets, of technologies, and also the importance of interoperability has increased. And what we've been seeing in those digital platform markets is the building of digital ecosystems. So either centered around hardware, like it started out with Apple, or centered around software, like it started out with Google. But they all now venture into hardware and software. And here, lock-in effects are really important. So if I know that my Apple devices work really smoothly, I want to stay within the Apple ecosystem as much as I can. And this has value for us as users, but it also comes with downsides. And I think that's where the problems arise. So we've also seen lots of digital markets tipping, and we also have seen lots of M&A activity, which is increased concentration. That was actually a topic that I've been asked to deal with from the European Commission. So I think it's an important starting point to understand why those markets in digital platforms are not working perhaps as well as we'd like them to work. And from a competition law scholar's perspective, because that is my perspective, what does that mean markets functioning well? It means that they contribute to consumer well-being. And this is a specific notion that is central in our European understanding. If you go to the US, they will talk about consumer welfare. And you can already see there's some discrepancy there in the terminology of what we might want to achieve in Europe and elsewhere. So then let me get to your second question, which was, what can we do about it? How do we rein in distortions by companies? And here, I mean, when we consider what tools we should rely on to address the shortcomings in those digital platform markets, to address the increased concentration in digital space and also the distortions in the market, also in the marketplace of ideas, which is important for our democracy. For me, from a scholarly perspective, it's clear that in the EU, we need to start with the very foundations, Articles 2 and 3 of the Treaty on European Union, which includes our fundamental values in the EU, democracy, freedom, equality, and also respect for human rights, which includes data protection as well as a right to a clean environment. And I think these provisions are there to safeguard our free, liberal, democratic societies. So it's the very essence of the EU. And we've already started in Europe to construct a governance model for digital platforms that has these values as a center. If we think of the General Data Protection Regulation, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the AI Act recently, but also IP protection, consumer protection, and of course, my field, the competition regime. So by having these strict guidelines in Europe, telling digital platforms what they can and cannot do, how they have to ensure data protection, also cybersecurity, IP rights, consumer protection, and also how they need to protect fundamental rights. I think we're putting up important guardrails and can expect competition to develop within those guardrails. And if you observe closely, you will see that this is what is happening in Europe. Isabell is an example of this. We have European companies that are coming up with new and innovative solutions within the framework that we've set out, and also pushed by this legal framework. And this is, I think, the kind of innovation and competition that we should be aiming for when we look at those companies. And it can also be competition from outside Europe. I'm not saying that that's not also a possibility, but they have to stick to the European standards. So I think to safeguard this kind of competition, we should also make good use of competition law, but of course that's a competition law scholar telling you that.
Thank you. I will just start the second round, which goes from here to there, and then give you one slot to comment, so that we have enough time for discussion. So short questions, short answers. I begin with you, Vicky, because I share your feeling that the European approach is one worth trying. However, what's in a European and also global view the role of, or the possible role of a competition law regarding fighting monopolies? If there's a monopoly, and you have these kinds of vertical integration, Vili also talks about in his book that Microsoft or Amazon or others control various power stations in this system. So when would be a moment where a lawyer like you would say, we have to pull the trigger and attack them? Yeah.
So I think the issue of market power is obviously at the center of competition law. It's what started out, that's how competition law started out in the 1890s in the US, where an accumulation of too much private power was seen as a threat to democracy, and therefore they came up with the antitrust laws to have a remedy against the bosses of the Senate. And this, I think we see this again today. We have an accumulation of private power that, like Vili said, is state-like without the legitimate elections, without accountability, and so on. And this is, so treating this market power is at the very heart of competition law, thinking of how we can deal with different instances of market power, be it because market power is accumulated through just increased concentration by buying up startups that are promising, that could be potential competitors, or also by regulating what companies are doing with their market power. Like Vili said, they're constantly abusing that market power. But competition law hasn't been fast enough in dealing with those issues. And this is the very reason why we now have the Digital Markets Act, trying to implement the same or similar rules, but with a different tool, a regulatory tool, rather than competition law, to have something that is acting faster. And in fact, in 10 days, I'll be speaking in Amsterdam, where we're trying to give small and medium-sized enterprises the understanding of what this could mean, what opportunities there are to compete with that big overbearing market power of the GAFAMs.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions from the audience to that. I will come to Thomas Reutterer. The European approach, we could have done, Isabell Claus has said that in her statement, there could have been alternative futures in the past, yeah. But the situation where we are now, there is this situation where we have smaller market actors, but quite an ambitious regulatory framework in the making, as Victoria has just mentioned. What are opportunities for winning market shares of European companies? Perhaps you have one or two examples from service sectors or other industries where you could see some light on the horizon or some positive options for firms in Europe which you could share with us.
Maybe to come back to Isabell's point also, the GDPR was also a good thing for non-EU companies in the end. I just in the afternoon was running into a study and they reported that mobile apps, they benefited a lot from the introduction of the GDPR. Apparently, non-EU mobile apps accommodated their strategy and they just, adopted apparently successfully. And they gained substantial market size. So it's not only that but it's a good thing. I think it's also in the interest of Europe that we also propagate our norms and our ideas about standards into the world. To come back to opportunities, and I mean, I have the impression, in particular, if you look at Austria, that we tend to think in terms of, if you ask our citizens what they are most proud of, they think about the countryside and the natural resources and the inheritance, and we have the feeling that we are living in a museum and we make a lot of money out of it, but sometimes I have the feeling there is no plan B around, right? And also to relieve where I'm coming from and from my home federal state, it's in Vorarlberg, I have the feeling that they, in particular in the Rheintal Valley, they come up with, they call it sometimes the Silicon Rheintal, and they try to come up with good solutions to cope with the situation if tourism is not working so well anymore. And I think it's, in terms of how could we compete relative to outside Europe, to the international players, so it's very difficult to compete to China probably, because they have a completely different regime, but with the US, so probably, I think it's also coming back to the Gen AI stuff that is coming out. I think it doesn't make sense to try to reinvent the wheel, but to combine it maybe with strengths that we have or opportunities or challenges that are around the corner anyway. So for example, I don't know, I think we have to make our society and our economy more sustainable. The AI will not put the waste down to the corridor, but or it will probably also not fix the broken pipe, but it will replace white-collar jobs, which is happening now. So the whole digital marketing agency scene is now under a huge disruption. It's predictable what's happening, right? So we need to combine this with something else, maybe sustainability, maybe we have an aging society, maybe we have to find new ways how to combine those, digital technologies to fix things in that area, and probably come up with hoping that we gain a competitive advantage out of that, and propagate that into the world. So I think there are opportunities, but I don't think that they are by just trying to copy what's already there.
Which is a good point to come to Isabell Claus for a second time. Perhaps you can also share one or two of your observations in that regard. And I didn't have a faculty meeting this afternoon, but when I was thinking the day before what to ask you, I first thought of asking you what would be your your wishes for the next Austrian government, and they said, oh my, stop, the Austrian government never has a real strategy for the digital world, so I have to ask you something else. So what's your wish list for the next EU Commission and the next European administration? Where would you see more regulation, less regulation, building up a huge cloud, whatever? Yeah, you're the fairy queen is waiting outside, so please yes. tell us.
Well, I think there are actually many wishes, and some of them are, first of all, with regard to speed, second, with regard to data-driven decisions, and third, as you say, to key strategic investments, which are unfortunately very big, and we are in Europe not that keen on deciding on very big investments. And I think this is really a problem for the private and for the public sector. I think with regard to speed, there is currently an immense opportunity with a large market change, with the large language models, with the new possibilities it offers, and with the situations that big techs fight against each other and will take a lot of market shares from one world to the other. Not the best for us, yeah, next dependency, but the thing is that there is an opportunity in the market. And also telecommunication companies and so on that we work a lot with, they do see this opportunity now. However, this time frame is very short. It's about expected to be 1.5 years, where you have to be really quick to do big investments, big decisions, and to really start things. And we are not the best positioned in this way, yeah? Because we need data for that, we need LLM knowledge for that, so capital for that, very far behind. So that's really a big challenge, and at the same time, if we let this opportunity go, it's the next dependency, and it's really getting worse for prosperity in Europe. So I think that's very clear, but it's really a big challenge. So speed is the one thing. Another example for data-driven decisions is once I was asked to apply for a position in the very high board of decision makers in the EU. And they really do lots of innovation investment decisions. And I asked them then, what do you expect from me? So what is the skill that I have to bring to the table? And they said, well, you have to be very political, we all like each other, and if we want to do decisions, we need to do it as a group. There was nothing about really how do we decide, based on what do we decide. It's like, it was the feeling I got, we decide on gut feelings, yeah, but not on data-driven, not on we decide because something is really shown to us by data, not by a small group of decision makers. So we have to understand that this world now, and I think it's a very generation thing too, I see it with a lot of young people, they decide very differently. They do decide, okay, data says I shall sell, I don't know, whatever at this place at the VU, because people look for it and lots of people look for it. So that's a data-driven decision. But the decision in Europe is never done this way, because first of all, we don't have the data. Second, we don't even think about deciding on data-driven things in small scale and in bigger scale. So I think that's really a cultural problem. How do we cope with decision making? And I think we should very soon get better on this. So these are, and of course, last point, regulation. Yes, as an entrepreneur, you always wish less regulation, especially with big techs that just write big checks. So if something costs money, they basically calculate how much is it. And regulation for entrepreneurs who can't pay the big check at any time actually is hindering innovation. So that's a very clear thing, but I think these three things, speed, data-driven decisions and less regulation or clever regulation, supporting European prosperity is very important.
The WU can become world famous with a real good curriculum on clever regulation, because that's so easily said and so difficultly done.
True.
Vili, 3 minutes wrap up. You choose 1 or 2 points.
Okay.
And I have also one question to you still. There's the digital revolution going on, and you have a little command of German. Wer ist das revolutionäre Subjekt?
Well, there's a lot to address here. I had many things I could seize upon, but I'm not sure which to pick up. Maybe just one quick thing to say at first is this idea that, you know, Europe regulates and US innovates, but I have to say, you know, where's the US 5G and 6G mobile network maker? Well, they regulated it out of existence in the early noughties. And so now 5G, 6G global market is basically a duopoly of European and Chinese players. Similarly, in AI accelerators, semiconductor manufacturing, absolutely key firm in the global supply chains, ASML, Dutch firm. So it's not the case that Europe is completely lost, even though we like to repeat this narrative to ourselves. But we, compared to Americans, they're very good at then using that power and projecting that power. Whereas in Europe, nobody's even raised the possibility of using any of the European tech power for any sort of geopolitical influence. It's the Americans who come to Europe and tell ASML, you're not allowed to sell to China anymore because we say so. And I think that's probably a good idea, but I think that's a decision that ought to have been made by European policymakers, not by Americans. What to say? I think I just want to say on the, Victoria knows this because, I think she's read the book that when it comes to competition as a means to address this, that's what competition law was originally created for, as Victoria says. To address monopolies that were starting to threaten democracy in the US. But those were oil and other commodity monopolies. And now we're talking about companies that are not producing a commodity. They're essentially producing social order. They're the very fabric and the underpinnings of society. And competition as a means to kind of make that sort of order accountable to the users. It's like saying, well, it doesn't matter that in this country there is autocracy and you can't vote for the leaders because you can always leave the country and go to another one. And that, because of that threat of exit, that will keep the political leaders accountable. No, it doesn't work that way. There's a high switching cost from switching from a country to a country, and therefore we've developed collective decision-making institutions such as elections to have accountability. And finally, I want to say that if we measure by sort of output legitimacy, how successful have big techs been in producing this order? I think they've been immensely successful. Like I said, these massive markets and opportunities for entrepreneurs. That's the same legitimation that the Chinese government uses to stay in power. They're saying, never mind the fact that we weren't elected, look at the results. We deliver results, therefore we're legitimate. But I think that, if we think that there is also a value in itself to democracy, that it's not just a means towards an end, but actually it's a value in itself, then we have to reject this. And then the digital revolution, it's not just a metaphor, it ends up being this revolution to supplant democratic order with a new, unfortunately, autocratic order. And then the question of the revolutionary subject. Now, if we need a counter-revolution to that again, I want to finish this point because this is relevant to I think, your university here, this is business and economics, because in my book and my research, the revolutionary subjects that I've discovered on the internet are small entrepreneurs. They're small businesses that suddenly one morning they get an email from the platform saying, we've revised our terms of service, and this business that you make your living out of, actually that's no longer allowed, or only our partners are allowed to do that and not your company. And some of them, many of them, they just fold at this point. They say, okay, sorry, there's nothing we can do. Entrepreneurs hate regulation, but it's also the big tech companies that do regulation today. It's not just states. Actually, Apple App Store review guidelines are one of the most bureaucratic and important laws of the digital economy today. But so some of the entrepreneurs, they just give up when hit with this regulation by the big techs. But some of them say, no, actually, I'm not going to give up. And they attempt to get their fellow entrepreneurs on board and collectively push back. And there are some success stories of this happening as well. So I want to finish with that positive note.
I'm very relieved because your definition of the revolutionary subject allows me not to become a reactionary in my old days. Yeah, that's a very good thing. There's a microphone in the room. I think we can have another 5 minutes after 7:30, so that we have 15 minutes of discussion time. Who wants to ask the first question? Another professor of WU. Please name and where you're from.
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot for the inspiring and excellent talk, and also for the panelists for their inspirations. So I have to disappoint you. I'm a humble computer scientist, although I have the honor to work here at WU. But as that, I was trained to look also at lower layers so of the network. And in a sense, my feeling is that, I don't know whether we are leaving this out of the equation, but whatever you think about it. So when you talk about cloud empires, they do not yet own the communication infrastructure. You mentioned GSM as an example, which is something that was actually created in Europe and is something that states still control, right? Also like energy and transport networks, etc. But however, the whole businesses and states start to depend on software as a service, and again to the same providers for driving their critical infrastructures. So I'm asking myself about, I hope I'm not getting paranoid, but what about this strand? So basically it's like not only the platforms have huge dependencies, but we're running into dependencies on a much, much deeper level as well. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So when it comes to physical infrastructure, the undersea cables used to be, which the internet is based on, used to be built by consortia of national telecommunications monopolies. So they were always multinational consortia. Now, the new ones, they're all built, most of them are built by a single big tech company. Because those big tech companies alone are big enough and have enough interests across the globe to be able to invest in such massive infrastructure that previously used to require the collaboration of multiple nation states. Hyperscale data centers, in which basically all of the AI training, frontier model AI training is happening, in which large swathes of our economies and our government services nowadays run, that market for infrastructure as a service is dominated by the same companies, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. And so it's also becoming physical in a sense. Having said that, I'm not saying that these are literally becoming states, that they're going to control territories, because it's a different sort of animal. Not every state either produces everything for itself, right? And so states are not self-sufficient. We live in a world of interdependence where states are dependent on each other. And now there's this new type of actor that is dependent on states for physical security, for guys with guns on the border. But at the same time, the state is dependent on the big tech for many vital functions. And the problems arise when that dependence becomes lopsided and it's no longer kind of mutual interdependence, but becomes dependence and lack of sovereignty.
Thanks.
Next question. Hannes Werten, or yeah, sorry.
The next professor, but now from Technical University Vienna. Thanks for your talk. But one question is, you missed somehow the web, because the web was a crucial issue in the 90s, and it essentially changed the business landscape. So big tech are the result of the web revolution. Looking now at the AI revolution, it's the same companies as before, or do you see new companies coming up? Because we have a technical revolution which would have an impact on the business landscape, but we cannot see that at the moment.
Well, interesting. I think this is also something that probably Isabell could address, but I think that, interestingly, all these AI labs that were set up explicitly as counterpoints to big tech, OpenAI, Anthropic, Hugging Face, the whole idea was we are not big tech. In the end, they end up falling right into the lab of big tech. And the key reason seems to be that in this AI era, the compute power, which is produced by physical infrastructure, which requires tens of megawatts of power, millions of liters of water, and hundreds of thousands of square meters of real estate, is such a crucial resource for producing these innovations that only the largest companies in the world can afford to do that. And therefore, doing that independently outside the influence of these giants seems to be very difficult. That's my analysis. But I would love to hear if you can see different signs.
I think so too. I think technology costs a lot of money, actually, and developing new things, and the more disruptive things are, the more expensive they are, or you take a very long time. I don't see so many examples where something is very easy and it's a big disruption. So if that's there, it's fine. But many things, if you push in much money and you take the risk with it, it can also fail. Then there is actually a big disruption can be expected. And so I think it's a money game at the end of the day. If you have enough money, you can push it in. If you can take the risk, you can even do 3 things at the same time, 3 big things, and 2 will fail and 1 not. But the money is a very big enabler in technology with regard to really big businesses and with regard to very big changes in markets.
Bernhard Krüppel-Sippen, we're running an AI agency called Became AI. I was wondering what happened to Netiquette, right? You mentioned that, to Netiquette in the history of the web and of the internet, that by 95, basically the Netiquette collapsed and went away. But given that this was kind of an ideal world at this time where everyone behaved nicely and it felt so good, what happened to that? Was it because the influx of people was too large, or was it because unqualified people came into the system that didn't know how to cope with that? And how does it relate to regulation right now, which is done by either big companies or governments? And can we get Netiquette back?
So basically, like very short version of that story is that there is a social science theory called the evolution of cooperation, Robert Axelrod. It's a kind of game theoretical model how under certain circumstances cooperative behavior in a prisoner's dilemma style situation can emerge spontaneously from repeated interactions without the need for any authority to kind of impose cooperation. And one of the conditions that's required for this to happen is that the interactions are repeated sufficiently. The shadow of the future looms large enough to incentivize the players to behave nicely towards each other. What happens when you grow the size of the community? At some point you reach a critical threshold where the likelihood of one user meeting the same user again becomes so small that the shadow of the future no longer acts as a sufficient incentive to kind of deter uncooperative behavior, and suddenly the cooperation breaks down. So that's kind of in the book my analysis of what happened to netiquette, to put it in theoretical terms.
Thank you.
A very polite answer and a very polite question, so the etiquette in the room is working. Who wants to come forward with the next question? Clemens Himpele, and then you in the second row.
Clemens Himpele, CEO of the City of Vienna. I have two points. One is going a little bit to the future. I think the next big thing with data will be satellite data. Even the City of Vienna has a lab to understand how to work with satellite data within an urban environment. But half of the satellites up there belongs to one person, to Elon Musk. What are we going to do with that? And are there any ideas how the European Commission or European Union can change that? Maybe together with some allies. And the second topic is, I mean, if it comes to the hyperscalers, you mentioned it, we are a colony in Europe, and if you're a colony, you're not making the rules. But we try to regulate that. And that comes to, for decision makers, the problem came up, can we use the technology or can't we use the technology? And I will bring it to a concrete topic. If you go to a hospital and you are not able to speak the language in which country you are, German here in Vienna, there are technologies that can help the doctors to translate the problems to the patients. But these are data, health data, which is especially regulated by the European Union with the General Data Protection Law, and they are processed in cloud, of course, probably Azure or Amazon Web Services or whatever. So we have a problem with data protection. But the answer cannot be that the doctors are not able to talk to the patients. But that's the situation we have in the European Union at the moment. And to me, digital humanism, you mentioned at the beginning, means there were some bans and don'ts, but there were also some imperatives and do's. And this should be imperative that we have to help the patients in the hospitals. And I have no idea how to deal with that as a CEO of the City of Vienna due to the regulation. And my simple question is, what should the next European Commission do to change that?
I can address that briefly. So I think you brought up colonies, and I think that's a really important point, because that opens up to us the idea that today Europe is like a colony. That opens up to us a whole history of colonialism to look at, well, what happened previously. History doesn't repeat itself, but we can still learn from it. And actually there is in international development, international political economy, there is this idea that it's possible for a developing country, Europe being the developing country in this instance, to bargain with the big company coming from the developed world and setting up operations there in a way that can result in successful technology transfer and technological sort of independence in the future. And we have examples of countries that have kind of successfully undergone that development. China is a prime example of that. You know, it used to receive a lot of technology, but it was they were very smart about under what terms they'd receive it. It's always a joint venture, always making sure that there is learning happening in the target, in the recipient, the host country. And then we have examples of other countries where it didn't go so well, and they remain extremely dependent on foreign tech. So I suppose, I don't know if, you know, for the city of Vienna, it's possible to somehow on a micro scale ensure that whilst you make use of these wonderful services, that at the same time the know-how and the ability to be a demanding, knowledgeable customer and client also grow in the organization, and that not the knowledge and skills are not all outsourced to a different country.
Does one of you two
just a brief comment to the, it's not necessarily the case that all the data is shared. There are many approaches that try to protect privacy. You have differential privacy sensitive machine learning, you have the blockchain. So there are solutions on the way that prevent you from sharing even your personal health data that they are not going to the cloud, for example. right? I think there are technical solutions on the way, but I'm a lay person, I'm just a marketing professor.
I would also say that this is quite true, but it took like 12 years after GDPR came up to really have these technologies in a bigger scale in a way. So they were there already, but now they are really used to solve these problems, and I think that's the only solution. But I'm absolutely with you.
We have to apply it.
That we are very late in some discussion of colony, and that it came to us and we didn't react before. And there are only such technological solutions, not on a society level, I guess. I don't know how.
Thank you. There was another question, you in the second row. Microphone, please. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you once again for your presentation. Petr Petrov from Vienna. In your opinion, which of the 6 designated gatekeepers is the most powerful or perhaps the most problematic one in terms of impeding effective competition? Thank you.
I don't think I have an answer to that. They are active in different areas, and I think it's interesting that some of them may be more willing to kind of, as we discussed just now, bargain with the host government and strike deals, build infrastructure, transfer skills, and then some may be more national champions of their home states and be less kind of willing to allow the colony to develop. So I think that is the key difference I'm interested in. Sorry, that's not a very direct answer to the question. Perhaps Victoria actually has a better idea of which of the 6 in terms of sort of competition law, which are the worst behaving against the legal norms.
So the worst behaving against the legal rules, I think we have a clear winner because there's been lots and lots of cases against Google, right? But I think it comes back to what you said, Vili, that those are actually digital platforms that are active in very different, what we call in the DMA, core platform services. So we have everything from web browsers to search engines to cloud services and so on and so on. So I think it depends on what sector you're looking at to then see where we see most problems with competition. And it all boils down to what are the capabilities of those companies to gather and amass more of the market power that we see transferring then into political power, which is the problem we're tackling here. And so I wouldn't want to pick a champion out of those, but just say that there's a reason why they have been designated as gatekeepers and why we're now looking closely at what they're doing and how they're doing it.
There's one more question in the last.
Irina Wacek, I'm finishing my studies here, and I wanted to ask you, when do you think that ChatGPT will be able to write a bachelor thesis or master thesis on a topic? Because if you give it right now, it stops like after several pages, it's very superficial, or it just gives you a guideline. Or when will be ChatGPT able to write even a scientific work on a topic?
Why? Do you have a deadline?
I think it already can. I would say it already can. Now, is the answer, I think.
Yeah,
perhaps you use the version you don't pay for.
Also not working that well yet in my experience, but I think that, and some of our students have concluded that since inevitably probably will be able to do that, well, that means we don't have to bother, we don't need to study anymore. But I think it's on the contrary, if it becomes so easy and cheap to fill the internet with generated text that may or may not be correct, the ability to understand and discern and analyze will be even more valuable than it was before, because you can no longer trust anything that's written.
There are a few people in the room who work on better aligning generative AI and explainable AI, so there's hope here in Vienna, yeah. And also at the WU, which is great, doing great work here. I think luckily the lights are still on, yeah, but we are a few minutes already over time. But your concentration as audience has showed us that this is a really gripping and fascinating topic. We will, in whatever combination, come up in the next months and years with other discussions on that. Also, I want to say at the end, I have a strong preference of living in a liberal democracy, creating such giant children like the big companies, than in an illiberal democracy where I would live in another country, or in an autocratic country where there's unity and merger of the digital possibilities and government nearly 100%. So it's a kind of Voltaire question, which is the best of all worlds. But I think I leave it here with saying thank you to you for coming and giving us this great talk. An extra applause for Vili Lehdonvirta, please.
Thank you for the wonderful discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to Victoria, to Isabell, to Thomas for great interventions and for answering my blown-up questions. Yeah. And thanks for you, great audience. Thanks Bernadette Kamleitner, Paul Czech, the team of WU. Thanks to the technicians, worked everything perfectly. Have a great evening. Come back tomorrow, hear the music, eat the Pepi Leberkas. There's the micro business competition right out there tomorrow night. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.